It's a pleasure to welcome back to VLGA Connect today Dr. Susan Rennie, who's with us really wearing three caps: Chair of the Alliance for Gambling Reform, the Mayor of the City of Darebin, and also works with the VLGA on the Minimising Gambling Harm program. Susan, welcome back to VLGA Connect. Good to see you.
Thanks, Chris. It's lovely to be here again.
So there's a lot of thought going into this issue of how we minimise gambling harm, what to do about poker machines as we come out of the COVID-19 environment. And we're going to touch on three things today that perhaps councils could be considering right now. And one is what to do about any new applications for poker machines, for example.
Absolutely. We know that a number of councils around Victoria have pending applications where poker machine operators are wanting to put poker machines in. And these applications are always subject to the undertaking of a social and economic impact assessment. Now, ordinarily, the data that's used for those assessments is data that's collected from the census. It's local data relating to things like unemployment and mortgage stress rates, for example. It might be some other social indicators. And one of the things that we know at the moment is that all of those data sets have been turned on their head and they are no longer accurate. And this is creating quite a particular challenge for councils when they think about what does this mean in relation to this application? How can we undertake an assessment when our data is out of date and inaccurate? And, you know, as a result of discussions with councils, and we've had some quite complex discussions with councils, we've actually written to the Minister for Local Government suggesting that these applications should actually be put on hold at the moment and shouldn't be considered until such time as we have more accurate data.
Do you think that's a likely outcome, though, given the current environment?
Look, I believe that it's a very sensible outcome. These are applications for venues or poker machines that are not yet in operation and don't yet exist. So this is not about putting a pause on something that's already operating. This is about actually just saying, before we introduce more poker machines into communities, knowing how much stress they cause in communities, it's really important to actually press pause and give some thought to making sure we've got the data right before we keep going.
So if that doesn't occur, if there's no hold placed on them, what are you advising councils to do in terms of their process at the moment?
I think it's really important that councils actually highlight in any submissions, if they do have an application that they have to respond to, highlight the deficiencies in data and the gaps and the information we don't know. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the Victorian Commission for Gaming and Liquor Regulation to actually make an assessment about the likely impact if they don't have current employment data, current data relating to things like family violence rates, mortgage stress, rental stress. And I think that all of those uncertainties need to go into the mix in the way in which an assessment is undertaken.
Yeah, good points. So there's also the issue of potential stimulus projects starting to roll out to communities. What's your view on whether certain applicants for those types of projects that derive income from poker machines should be treated in that process?
I think this is a really interesting one because I know that councils have been so keen to actually assist their clubs and their business communities through this COVID-19 period that perhaps we haven't actually thought, who are we assisting and what might that assistance achieve? The primary aim of a lot of this stimulus activity is to keep people in jobs or to get people back to work as quickly as possible. And one of the reasons that we particularly wanted to alert people to this issue of where stimulus dollars go and whether they're well spent in a pokies venue is because the employment return from operating poker machines is so poor. So there's some good evidence that suggests that for $1 million lost on the poker machines, only 3 jobs are created. Whereas if that $1 million went into an eatery, into a sort of dining experience, 20 jobs would be created. And so in an environment of constrained resources, which is the environment that councils are working in, it's incredibly important that council efforts and support to get their community back to work and to support businesses actually goes to businesses that are going to create the jobs and keep people employed. And all the evidence suggests that that won't occur if that money goes to pokies venues, which isn't to say that those venues aren't doing it tough. You know, I completely accept that this COVID-19 shutdown has actually impacted those businesses quite significantly, as it has others. But it's about you know, if we've got limited dollars, don't we want to actually make sure that they get as many people working again?
Are you aware of any situations arising yet where that's been a matter for councils to consider?
I don't think it has yet, but I think it will increasingly come up as councils look to nuance a bit more the recovery packages that they've got in place. I certainly know that, you know, in the first instance, we wanted as councils to respond very quickly to make sure that we sent out very clear messages about the help that was available. And a lot of the first wave of council responses have been a somewhat blanket approach, which has been to say, if you're experiencing, for example, difficulty paying rates, we will waive the interest if you're late. And that's applied to everyone. I think as councils move forward and might be, for example, looking at business grants, community recovery grants, that's the point in time at which I think it's really important to make sure that that assistance goes to operations that will most benefit from it.
The third point to talk about is really what does a transition back to normal look like, and what role, if any, should poker machine venues be playing in that whole reopening process? Or I guess more to the point, what role can councils play in that process?
Chris, I think this is an incredibly important issue because throughout the last month, I've heard numerous stories from people who are heavy gamblers about what a relief it has been that these venues have been shut. Now, I know some people will have been really struggling because gambling can be quite an addiction, and so there'd be people experiencing sort of withdrawals almost, but at the same time, stories of people being able to buy their grandkids Easter eggs for the first time in a decade, stories of people actually having money to pay bills, not feeling stressed and stretched in terms of their financial situation. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could maximise those benefits that come from this process? So I think, you know, that means there's a real opportunity for councils to think, firstly, what can we do to encourage people not to go back into the pokies venues? Are there particular community development activities we can undertake? Are there particular marketing or communication activities we can undertake that encourage people to use other council facilities? And that might be things like, you know, the libraries, returning to the libraries. I certainly hope that we'll see libraries open before we see pokies rooms, for example, because I think that sort of sets the tone of what we want recovery to look like. But I think also, really importantly, when we think about poker machine venues and the risk of transmission of COVID-19, they are actually quite high risk locations for COVID-19 transmission. And that's because of a sort of combination of a number of factors. One of which is that they're very high touch environments. You know, people are in there for the purposes of pushing that machine repeatedly every 3 seconds. We know that gamblers who might have gambling addictions are much more likely to rub machines, to touch them more. They're more likely to cry, they're more likely to sweat. And all of those activities, if you put them together for a prolonged period of time, which is what tends to happen in front of a machine, means that it creates a significant problem. So, you know, that's another sort of dimension, I think, for councils to be aware of, and it's something that the VLGA has written to the Chief Health Officer to discuss and to actually ask about what particular precautionary measures are going to be put in place to ensure that those heightened risks in a poker machine environment are not are taken sufficiently into account so that we maintain the amazing gains that we've made in Victoria in terms of flattening that curve and really minimising COVID-19 transmission.
Question without notice, Susan. The prevalence of poker machine venues that operate out of venues that belong to councils, where council's the landlord, is that declining in your estimation over time, or do we still have a significant number of venues where the council is actually the landlord?
Chris, it depends very much on the municipality. So I think nearly all councils that I've spoken to would accept now that it's a very undesirable situation to devote public land to poker machines. There's a historical legacy issue, which is that many of these clubs got poker machines several decades ago when we didn't have the evidence that we have now. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that you know, the situation with councils with poker machines on council land is a historical legacy, and it's one that a lot of councils are actually grappling with. as the opportunity has come up over the years, most councils that have seen that opportunity have actually got rid of poker machines off council land. That's been a possibility. And other councils that haven't been able to achieve that have actually talked about what are the harm minimisation measures they'd like to see in place. So I think, you know, lots of councils wouldn't have that problem. There won't be poker machines on council land. But I have to say there are a number of councils where there are a handful of clubs, one or two clubs that might have poker machines. And I do think there are further possibilities there for councils to really think about that, both when the leases expire, to either think about saying, is this in keeping with our community's expectation of what public land should be used for? Are there better ways in which councils could use this space? And I think that's a really big one. It's about what are the lost opportunities. If you've got, you know, a magnificent sort of sporting venue or some kind of function centre, what are the lost opportunities when that is filled up with poker machines rather than filled up with people and community groups? And, you know, and then there's that other question of a lot of harm is occurring in these venues. Can councils use their position as a leaseholder to reduce some of that harm?
Yes, if you say legacy issues and where they're not in a position to deal with them right now, there might be a time lag before they can. There are certain policy levers that they can pull to try and ameliorate the situation in the shorter term. The VLGA offers advice and assistance to councils in that space?
Absolutely. So the VLGA is really proud that we've got a funded program and dedicated staff to assisting councils and councillors to think about what they can do to reduce harm from gambling. And that's across a whole range of different activities. It relates not only to when there's an application for more poker machines in an area, but also to the sort of community development activities that might take place within councils, to marketing and communications activities, and to alternative sorts of activities that community members might participate in. So, you know, for example, the VLGA is an incredibly proud partner in the Libraries After Dark project, which is now being rolled out to more and more councils across Victoria.
Terrific, wonderful support there, Susan. Thank you very much for outlining all of that for us. A topic we'll keep an eye on and keep in touch on, and hopefully talk to you as progress is made in the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely, Chris, and I hope that we have a really good news story in the future about the number of people who have benefited from the closure of poker machine venues, and I hope that those gains they've made stay with them, because they will stay then with our communities.
Indeed. Thank you. Dr. Susan Rennie, our guest on VLGA Connect today. We'll talk to you soon. That's another edition of VLGA Connect for you, and if you'd like to send us your ideas or questions for upcoming stories and episodes of VLGA Connect, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email at any time to vlga@vlga.org.au. See you next time on VLGA Connect.